The cloth wrapping was stained with something that might have been oil or might have been blood. Nobody could tell which, and the human carrying it did not explain. 47 students stood in the training hall of the Galactic Combat Academy. They represented 12 species from across known space. The Dralith came with their 4 arms and natural armor. The Vozari stood like living crystals, light bending through their bodies. The Nauth prowled on legs built for hunting, their claws already extended in anticipation. And then there was David Harrow, walking in 7 minutes late, carrying that stained bundle on his back. Master Solvan had trained warriors for 400 years. He had seen every weapon created by every species that had achieved space travel. Plasma swords, molecular blades, weapons that could cut through starship hulls. He had seen things that could level cities held in hands no larger than a human child's. He had never seen anyone walk into his training hall carrying something wrapped in dirty cloth. Human, Master Solvan said, his 4 arms crossing in the Dralith expression of patience wearing thin. You are late. You will explain. David Harrow was 34 years old. His hair was going gray at the sides. His hands were covered in scars, some from digging in ancient dirt, some from fighting in recent wars. He looked around the training hall at the assembled species and their gleaming weapons, and he nodded once as if confirming something to himself. Traffic, he said. A laugh rippled through the students. The Nauth warrior named Rika made a sound in her throat that her species used when spotting weak prey. Present your training weapon, Master Solvan ordered. All students must register their equipment for safety protocols. David set down his bundle on the floor. He knelt beside it with a care that seemed strange for something so poorly wrapped. His fingers found the knots and began working them loose. The cloth fell away. The sword was green with age. Its bronze blade had turned the color of old copper left in rain. The edge was still sharp. The handle was wrapped in leather that had been replaced 1,000 times. The pommel was shaped like a lion's head, worn smooth by countless palms. The hall scanning systems activated automatically. Numbers appeared on the wall display. Age, 3,247 Earth years. Origin, Anatolian region, Earth. Composition, bronze alloy, tin content consistent with late Bronze Age metallurgy. That belongs in a museum, someone said. It belongs in a garbage disposal, Rika added. Her species had achieved space travel while humans were still figuring out agriculture. The idea of bringing something so primitive to a combat academy was either an insult or a joke. But David Harrow was not laughing. That he stood with the sword in his hand, and something in the room changed. The weapon had looked like a relic when it was lying on the floor. In his grip, it looked like exactly what it was, a tool for killing, made by people who had been very good at killing. This sword was forged during what my people call the Bronze Age collapse, David said. His voice was quiet. The room had gone silent enough that everyone could hear him. Civilizations fell. Empires burned. For 200 years, the Mediterranean world tore itself apart. This sword was there. He turned it slightly, letting light catch the green bronze. It's been carried by soldiers, mercenaries, guards, and kings. It passed from father to son, from teacher to student, from dying hands to living ones. Every generation added to it. Not just the metal, the knowledge, the technique, the memory of every fight it ever survived. Superstition, Rika said, but her voice had lost some of its mockery. No, said Palom. The Vozari student rarely spoke. His crystalline body hummed with frequencies that others could not hear. Not superstition. I can hear it. The blade is resonating with patterns. Millions of them. Layered. Oh, Master Solvan stepped closer. His 4 hands remained clasped, but his eyes had changed. He was looking at David Harrow differently now. You claim this weapon carries memory, he said. I claim nothing, David replied. The sword speaks for itself. Then let it speak. Master Solvan gestured toward the training floor. Show us what 3,000 years of human warfare has produced. Rika stepped forward before anyone else could move. Her claws extended fully, each one capable of cutting through combat armor. Her species had been apex predators before they achieved sentience. They had never stopped being apex predators after. "I'll test the museum piece," she said. David looked at her. He did not raise the sword. He did not take a fighting stance. He simply stood there, the ancient bronze hanging loose at his side. "You'll need to actually try to hurt me," he said. "Otherwise, there's no point." Rika's eyes narrowed. Her species did not like being told what to do by prey animals. She moved, the Nalth were fast. Their nervous systems processed information 3 times faster than humans. Their muscles were designed for explosive bursts of lethal speed. Rika crossed the distance between them in less than a second. Her claws aimed at David's throat. She found herself on the floor with bronze at her neck before she understood what had happened. The room was silent. David Harrow stood over her, the ancient sword pressed against her scales, and his eyes held something that made even Master Solvan take a step back. 3,000 years, David said quietly. Every wielder who carried this blade faced something faster, something stronger, something that should have killed them. They survived. They passed on what they learned. And now I carry all of it. He removed the blade from her throat and offered her his hand. "Do you want to try again?" Rika stared at him. In her entire life, nothing had ever made her feel like prey. Until now. 3 training drones lay in pieces on the floor, their advanced circuitry sparking and dying. David Harrow stood among the wreckage, breathing hard, the bronze sword still humming with the vibrations of impact. Nobody was laughing anymore. Master Solvan had set the drones to their highest difficulty. These were machines designed to test warriors from species with natural armor, enhanced reflexes, and centuries of genetic combat optimization. They had lasted 11 seconds against a human with a bronze sword. "Impossible," whispered a Draelith student. "The blade should have shattered against their plating." "Watch the recording again," Palum said. The Vozari was projecting the fight in slow motion through his crystalline body. "He never strikes their armor directly. Every cut finds a joint, a gap, a weakness. Bronze Age weapons were designed to fight bronze armor," David said, wiping his blade clean with the same stained cloth. "Then iron armor came, and the techniques adapted. Then steel, then ceramic composites, then energy shielding." He sheathed the sword at his hip. 3,000 years of adaptation. The blade knows where armor fails. Rika had been watching from the edge of the training floor. She had not spoken since David put her on the ground. Her pride demanded she hate him. But something else, something older than pride, demanded she understand. "Show me," she said. David looked at her. "Show me how humans fight," Rika continued. "My species believes newer is always better. Faster reflexes, sharper claws, better technology. But you fight with something ancient, and you won." She paused, struggling with words that did not come naturally to her kind. "I want to know why." David considered her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Humans weren't born with claws," he said. "No armor, no venom. We were soft, slow, and weak compared to everything else on our planet. So we built tools. And then we spent 10,000 years learning how to use those tools to kill things much more dangerous than ourselves." He drew the sword again. In the light, the green bronze looked almost alive. "This sword has killed lions, bears, wolves, other humans wearing armor designed specifically to stop it. Every time it faced something it shouldn't have been able to defeat, someone figured out how to defeat it anyway. And they passed that knowledge down. Through training," Rika said. "Through survival." David's voice was quiet. "Every technique this sword knows was learned by someone who was about to die and found a way not to. That's different from training. Training prepares you for what you expect. Survival teaches you to face what you never imagined." The conversation was interrupted by an alarm. Red lights began flashing throughout the training hall. Master Solvan's communication implant activated, and his expression changed in ways that made every student in the room tense. "All students report to Briefing Room 7, he announced. "The Academy has received emergency deployment orders." The walk to the briefing room was silent. Students who had been mocking each other an hour ago now walked together, their differences suddenly less important. David fell in a step beside Hendrix, the only other human in the cohort. The younger man carried a standard plasma sword and wore standard combat armor. He had looked embarrassed during David's demonstration. That thing really works? Huh? Hendricks asked, nodding at the bronze blade. It works, David said. I thought you were crazy when you walked in. Thought maybe you had some kind of death wish. David said nothing. The briefing room held a holographic display of a planet. Green continents, blue oceans, cities marked by glowing dots. And approaching those cities, a swarm of red markers that looked like a disease spreading. Colony Bremen, 4, Master Solvin announced. 12 million residents. Agricultural world, minimal defenses. He paused, under attack by Skarath harvesters. A murmur went through the students. The Skarath were nightmares given form. Machine-organic hybrids that captured living beings and processed them into components for more Skarath. They had appeared 600 years ago and had been spreading ever since. Standard energy weapons are effective initially, Master Solvan continued. But the Skarath adapt. Within hours, they shift their composition to resist whatever frequency is being used against them. Plasma, laser, particle, they learn to absorb it all. Then how we fight them? Hendricks asked that David's hand moved to his sword. Master Solvan noticed the gesture. Something passed between the old Dralith warrior and the human, an understanding that took no words. Perhaps, Master Solvan said slowly, we have been thinking about this problem incorrectly. The Skarath adapt to new threats. They have been doing so for 600 years. His eyes found David's, but they have never faced anything old. The transport ships launched within the hour. David sat apart from the others, carefully oiling his bronze blade with substances that smelled like earth. Like home. Like 3,000 years of warriors doing exactly what he was doing now. Preparing for a fight that should not be possible to win, and preparing to win it anyway, because that was what the sword demanded. That was what every wielder before him had done. You faced the impossible, and you found a way through, and then you passed on what you learned. The blade caught light from a passing star, and for just a moment, David could almost see them. All the hands that had held this weapon before his. All the eyes that had looked down its edge at something that wanted to kill them. They were all watching now, and they expected him to be worthy. Palom found David alone in the cargo hold, sitting cross-legged on the floor with the sword across his knees. The Vozari moved without sound. His crystalline body shifted colors as he approached, frequencies of light dancing through his form like thoughts made visible. He stopped a few meters away and simply observed. You can hear it, David said without looking up. The sword. Palom told me you could. I am Palom. David looked up then. Right. Sorry. I'm still learning which species is which. No offense taken. Palom settled onto the floor across from David, his body folding in ways that looked uncomfortable, but probably were not. May I listen again? More closely this time. David held out the sword. Palom did not touch it. Instead, he leaned close and began to hum. The sound was below human hearing, but David felt it in his bones, in his teeth, in the ancient bronze itself. Minutes passed. When Palom finally stopped, there was something like awe in his voice. It remembers, not in words, in patterns, vibrations, every impact, every strike, every death. He paused. It remembers being afraid, being desperate, being the last defense between something terrible and something precious. Over and over for 3,000 years. That's what weapons do, David said. They remember violence. No, Palom's crystalline form pulsed with color. Other weapons remember how to destroy. Yours remembers why. I can hear the difference. Your ancestors did not fight because they enjoyed killing. They fought because they had no other choice. And each one promised the next that the sword would keep being carried, keep being used to protect. David was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough. My people have a word for that. Duty. The Vozari do not understand duty, Palom admitted. We are peaceful. We have no warriors. When conflict comes, we shatter. He touched his own chest, where a crack ran through the crystal. But I am beginning to understand why some beings would choose to face violence instead of flee from it. The ship shuddered. An announcement echoed through the hold, dropping out of faster than light in 10 minutes. All personnel prepare for combat deployment. David rose and belted the sword at his hip. Palam followed him to the observation deck, where other students had gathered to watch their approach. Colony Bremen, 4 filled the viewport. Half of it was burning. Fires spread across one continent in patterns that were too regular to be natural. Columns of smoke rose so high they were visible from orbit, and moving through those fires, visible even at this distance, were the Skarath. Sweet ancestors, Hendrix whispered. The Skarath harvesters looked like they had been designed by nightmares. Each one was the size of a building, a mass of metal and organic tissue fused together in ways that hurt to look at. They moved on legs that might once have belonged to other species, reaching out with arms that ended in tools for cutting, grabbing, processing. And behind them, where they had already passed, there was nothing left. 12 million people, Rika said. Her predator's confidence had faded during the journey. Facing prey was one thing. Facing something that saw all life as raw material was different. 11 million now, Master Solvan corrected grimly. Perhaps fewer. The Skarath began their harvest 2 days ago. Then why are we only arriving now? A Draelith student demanded. Because the colony's distress signal was jammed. Because the nearest fleet was 3 systems away. Because the galaxy is vast, and help is never as close as we need it to be. Master Solvan turned to face his students. We are not a rescue force. We are barely a delaying action. But we will fight anyway, because that is what warriors do. David stepped forward. All eyes turned to him. The Skarath adapt to new weapons, he said. They've spent 600 years perfecting that ability. Energy frequencies, molecular compositions, anything technological, they learn to absorb or deflect. We know this, Master Solvan said, but they've never faced anything truly old. David drew his sword. The bronze caught the light of the burning planet below. They've never faced something that was killing their kind of threat before they existed. Before space travel. Before machines. Before recorded history. You think a bronze sword can hurt them? Hendrix asked. I think a bronze sword is something they cannot understand. David looked at the assembled students. And that means they cannot adapt to it. Not immediately. Not easily. We hit them with everything old we can find. Physical weapons. Natural claws. He nodded at Rika. Things that existed before the Skarath did. Things they've never needed to develop defenses against. That's insane, someone said. That's human warfare, David replied. Find what the enemy doesn't expect. Hit them with it. Keep hitting them until they break. Master Solvan was silent for a long moment. Then he began to laugh. It was not a happy sound. 400 years I have trained warriors, he said. I have taught them to use the finest technology available. The most advanced weapons. The most sophisticated techniques. And now a human tells me to throw it all away and fight like primitives. He drew his own weapon, a blade of folded Draelith steel that had been in his family for 200 generations. I think, he said slowly, that I finally understand why your species conquered its planet. The transport began its descent toward the burning world below, and David Harrow gripped his bronze sword tighter, ready to teach the Skarath what 3,000 years of human warfare really meant. The first Skarath harvester fell with bronze in its processing core, and nobody who witnessed it would ever forget the sound it made dying. David had hit the ground running before the transport's doors fully opened. Around him, the other students fanned out, energy weapons ready. They had landed in what remained of a residential district. Buildings stood half-collapsed. Streets were covered with debris. And moving through that destruction, collection units were still grabbing survivors. Fire, Master Solvan commanded. Plasma bolts lit up the air. The collection units stumbled, sparked, fell. For 3 seconds, victory seemed possible. Then the Skarath adapted. Their bodies shifted. Metal plates rearranged. What had been gaps in their armor became solid surfaces. The plasma bolts that had torn through them moments ago now splashed harmlessly against reconfigured plating. They're already learning, Hendrix shouted. The energy weapons aren't working. David did not stop to respond. He was already among the collection units, and the bronze sword was singing point. 3,000 years of technique flowed through his arms. Cut here. Dodge there. This joint always fails under lateral pressure. That seam splits if you angle the blade, just so. The sword had spent millennia learning how armor fails, and the Scarath, for all their adaptation, were still just armor. The first unit went down with its leg joints severed. The second lost the arm it was using to grab a screaming colonist. The third tried to adapt, tried to shift its body to counter the bronze blade, but it was too slow. Physical attacks were not energy frequencies. They could not be absorbed. They had to be blocked, deflected, countered. And the Scarath had never needed to learn how to do that against something so primitive. Follow him, Rika roared. Her claws extended fully as she launched herself at the nearest unit. Natural weapons. Evolved killing tools. The Scarath had not planned for those either. The line broke. Students who had spent their lives relying on technology threw aside their useless plasma weapons and grabbed whatever they could find. Metal rods, broken supports, stone from collapsed buildings. A Drelith student ripped a ceremonial blade from his own back and carved through a Scarath unit with 4 arms of pure fury. "This is madness," someone screamed. "This is working," David shouted back. He was covered in fluid that might have been lubricant or might have been something worse. The bronze sword had turned dark with impacts, but he was still standing, still fighting, still carving a path through enemies that should have been impossible to hurt. The Scarath adapted again. Their bodies began growing spikes, physical defenses to counter physical attacks. But adaptation took time, resources, attention, and while they were adapting to the unexpected assault, they were not harvesting. "Push forward," Master Solvan commanded. His own blade was wet with Scarath fluid. 400 years of combat experience had prepared him for many things. Fighting alongside humans, using tactics older than space travel, had not been one of them. But he was learning. The students pushed. Block by block, street by street, they carved through the Scarath collection units with weapons that had no business being effective and techniques that made no logical sense. Hendrik stayed close to David, swinging a metal bar with more desperation than skill. The younger human had tears running down his face, whether from smoke or fear or something else. "I don't know what I'm doing," he gasped between swings. "Neither did I the first time." David parried a Scarath limb and countered with a thrust that found the weak point in its torso plating. "Just keep moving. Keep hitting. Don't think about whether it should work. Just make it work." "How?" "Because the alternative is dying." David pulled Hendrix down as a Scarath arm swung over their heads. "And we don't get to die. We've got ancestors watching. We've got a sword to carry forward. We've got people counting on us to be the ones who figure out how to survive this." The battle lasted 4 hours to be the end. The residential district was clear. 300 colonists had been saved from processing. The Academy students stood among the wreckage of 47 Scarath collection units, battered and bleeding and utterly exhausted. They had won, but then the ground began to shake. David looked up. On the horizon, something massive was approaching. It blotted out the smoke-filled sky. It moved on legs that could step over buildings. Its body was a mountain of adaptive metal and harvested flesh that a harvester prime. "That," Master Solvan said quietly, "is what the collection units report to." "Can we fight it?" Rika asked. Her claws were chipped. Her scales were cracked. She had never looked more alive. David stared at the approaching giant. His sword arm ached. His body screamed for rest. And the bronze blade in his hand hummed with something that might have been eagerness. "We have to," he said, "or everyone we just saved gets processed anyway." The Harvester Prime let out a sound that was part machine grinding and part organic scream. It had noticed them. It was coming. And David Harrow, carrying a sword older than history, walked forward to meet it, because that was what the weapon demanded. That was what every hand that had held it before expected. You faced the impossible. You found a way. You survived. And then you passed the sword to the next one who needed it. Night came to Bremen, 4, and with it came the waiting. The students had fortified a hospital complex where 300 colonists were sheltering. The Harvester Prime had stopped its advance at sunset, as if it was studying them, learning, planning. It would come at dawn. Everyone knew it. David sat on the hospital roof, cleaning his sword by the light of the burning city. The bronze blade was nicked in 7 places, dented in 3 more, but still sharp, still whole, still ready. Paolum found him there, climbing to the roof with movements that seemed impossible for a crystalline being. "You have decided something," Paolum said. It was not a question. David did not stop cleaning the blade. "How can you tell?" "Your heartbeat has changed. The frequencies are calmer now, more focused, like someone who has stopped asking questions and found answers." "Is that what peace sounds like?" "I do not know. The Vozari have no word for what you are feeling." Paolum settled beside him, his body catching the distant firelight and scattering it into rainbows. "But I think it sounds like goodbye." David was quiet for a long time. "The Harvester Prime has a core," he finally said. "A biological brain at its center. Kill that, and the whole thing dies. But reaching it means going through kilometers of adaptive armor. An impossible task. For a direct assault, yes." David held up the sword, examining its edge. "But if something distracts it, forces it to focus all its adaptive resources on a single threat, then someone fast enough might slip through and reach the core. You intend to be the distraction. I intend to give it something to adapt to." David lowered the blade. "Something it's never encountered. Something that will keep it so busy trying to counter me that it forgets to watch its back. That is suicide." "Maybe." David smiled slightly. "Or maybe 3,000 years of impossible victories means this sword knows something we don't." Paolum's crystalline form pulsed with colors that David was beginning to recognize as distress. "The blade cannot protect you from something that size. The blade doesn't protect anyone." David's voice was soft. "It just carries forward. That's what it does. That's what it's always done." Every hand that held it eventually fell. But the sword kept going. The techniques kept passing on. The duty kept moving forward. "Then who carries it after you?" David looked down at the hospital below. Through the windows, he could see Hendrix helping colonists settle in for the night. The younger human had not stopped moving since they arrived. He was terrified, exhausted, completely out of his depth. And he was still fighting anyway. David said. They gathered before dawn. Students, colonists able to carry weapons, even a few of the hospital staff who refused to hide. Master Solvan addressed them with words that sounded like prayers in his native tongue. David pulled Rika aside. "The core is biological," he told her. "Your claws can cut through organic material faster than anything we have. When the Harvester Prime focuses on me, you go through the gap I create and you find that core." Rika's predator eyes studied him. "You think I will flee while you die? I think you want to prove that newer isn't always better." David gripped her shoulder, a human gesture she had learned to tolerate. "I've shown you what old weapons can do. Show me what old instincts can do. Hunt it, kill it, and if you fall before I reach the core, then I'll have bought you time anyway." David released her. "That's what humans do. We throw ourselves at impossible things so that someone else can finish the job. That is not logical." "No, it's faith." David smiled at her confusion. "Faith that the next one will be better than us. Faith that the sacrifice means something. Faith that the sword keeps moving forward." Hendrix appeared at his elbow. The younger human looked like he had aged 10 years in the past day. "Let me come with you," he said. "No, I'm not asking." "I know." David turned to face him fully. "But someone has to live through this. Someone has to carry the sword after. Find someone else." "There is no one else." David drew the bronze blade and held it between them. "This sword has passed from dying hands to living ones for 3,000 years. Every wielder knew that someday they'd be the one who fell. And every one of them found someone to carry it forward." He pressed the hilt toward Hendrix. "I'm not ready," Hendrix whispered. "Neither was I. Neither was the one before me. Neither was the one who forged it." David's eyes were steady. "You don't get ready for this. You just do it anyway." The sun broke over the horizon. The Harvester Prime began to move. David took his sword back, turned toward the approaching mountain of metal and flesh, and began walking forward. Alone, behind him, Hendrix watched with tears on his face. Rika tensed, waiting for a moment. Paolum hummed frequencies that might have been prayers, and the bronze sword, 3,000 years old and still hungry for impossible fights, caught the dawn light and gleamed like it was new. David Harrow did not look back that he had made a promise. Every wielder had made the same promise. Face the impossible. Buy time for others. Pass the sword on. The Harvester Prime saw him coming and let out that terrible scream of machine and organic fury. David smiled and raised his ancient blade. "Come on then," he whispered. "Let me show you what history tastes like." And he charged. The Harvester Prime did not understand what was attacking it. Its sensors detected one human, one primitive blade, one target that should have been processed in seconds. But every time it adapted, every time it shifted its composition to counter the bronze sword, David Harrow changed his approach. He cut from angles the machine had not prepared for. He dodged in patterns that made no logical sense. He moved like someone carrying 3,000 years of survival instinct in his muscles. The Harvester Prime dedicated more resources to stopping him. Then more still. And in doing so, it forgot to watch its back. Rika moved through the gap like a shadow. Her species had evolved to hunt things larger than themselves. For the first time in her life, she was using those instincts exactly as nature had intended. She found the biological core deep within the machine's chest, a pulsing mass of organic tissue that might once have belonged to whatever species the Skarath had originally been. It was surrounded by layers of protective armor, layers that had all shifted to counter the bronze sword attacking from outside, that Rika's claws cut through flesh that had not needed defending in 600 years. The Harvester Prime screamed. Not the machine sound it had made before. Something older, something afraid. Then it began to collapse. David saw the mountain start to fall and tried to move. 3,000 years of technique told him exactly where to go, how to dodge, which path would lead to safety. His body refused to follow. The fight had taken everything he had. His legs gave out beneath him. The bronze sword slipped from fingers that could no longer grip. And then there was only darkness and weight and silence. They found him 3 hours later. Paolum had used resonance frequencies to locate him under the debris. Drayla students had dug through metal and flesh with their bare hands. Hendrix had not stopped screaming orders until they pulled David free. He was broken. Ribs cracked. Arm shattered. Internal bleeding that would have killed anyone without immediate medical attention. But he was alive, and his hand still clutched the bronze sword. "Idiot," Rika said when he opened his eyes in the hospital bed. "Stupid, stubborn, primitive idiot." David tried to laugh and regretted it immediately. Did it work? The Harvester Prime is dead. The remaining Skarath units scattered without command. Rika's voice was rough in ways that had nothing to do with her species' biology. "Colony Bremen, for we'll survive. Because of you. Because of all of us." "No." Rika leaned closer. "Because a human walked out alone against something he could not defeat and refused to die until the job was done. That is not teamwork. That is something else. Something I do not have words for. We call it stubbornness. I call it insanity." But she was almost smiling. Magnificent insanity. The days that followed blurred together. Medical treatment. Debriefings. Recovery that would take months. David spent most of it drifting in and out of consciousness, the sword always beside his bed, always within reach. Master Solvan visited once. He stood in the doorway for a long time without speaking. "For 100 years, he finally said, I thought I'd seen everything warriors could do. I was wrong." He bowed, a gesture his species reserved for the most profound respect. "Thank you for teaching an old soldier that he still had things to learn." David was too weak to respond properly. He just nodded. Hendrix came every day. He sat beside the bed and talked about nothing. About the colony's reconstruction. About the other students. About his own fear and shame and confusion about everything that had happened. David let him talk. Let him process. Let him become someone who might be ready for what came next on the 7th day. David asked for the sword. Hendrix brought it to him. The bronze blade was battered now, cracked in 2 places, bent slightly near the tip. It looked like what it was, a weapon that had fought one battle too many. "It's damaged," Hendrix said quietly. "It survived." David ran his fingers along the blade. "Just like always. Worse shape than before, but still here. Still ready." The Academy Smiths offered to repair it, or replace it. They said they could forge something similar with modern materials. No, David's voice was firm. This blade is this blade. Every dent, every crack, every stain. That's 3,000 years of history. You don't replace that. You just keep carrying it forward. He held the sword out to Hendrix. It's yours now. Hendrix did not move. You're not dying. No, but I won't fight again. Not like before. David's broken arm would heal. His body would mend. But some injuries went deeper than bone. The sword needs someone who can use it. That's you now. I'm not worthy. Neither was I. David smiled. Neither was anyone. That's not how it works. You carry it until you find the next person. You pass on what you've learned. And then you trust that the sword will keep going. Hendrix reached out. His hand was shaking. David guided it to the hilt. Promise me, David said. Promise you'll find someone after you. Promise the sword keeps moving. I promise. David let go. 1 year later, Hendrix stood in the training hall of the Galactic Combat Academy. He wore the bronze sword at his hip. The blade had been carefully maintained, its cracks sealed with techniques David had taught him. It looked ancient. It looked impossible. It looked exactly like what it was that a young now student approached, drawn by the strange weapon. That's an antique, she said. Surely you can afford something better. Hendrix smiled. Somewhere behind him, he could almost feel David watching. Almost feel 3,000 years of warriors nodding in approval. Let me tell you about a man named David Harrow, he said, and the sword older than history. And so the story passed on to AS it had for 3,000 years. AS it would for 3,000 more, because that was the promise. That was the duty. That was the weight of inherited steel. The sword remembered. The sword demanded. And someone would always pick it up and keep walking forward.